Every team, every topic, everywhere. This is Believe.
Ich warte seit Wochen auf diesen Tag und tanz vor Freude über den Asphalt. Als wär's ein Rhythmus, als gäb's ein Lied, das mich immer weiter durch die Straßen zieht. Komm dir entgegen.
Hello and welcome to Gegenpressing, the Bundesliga podcast. I'm Manu and he's Stefan Bienkowski. Stefan, how's it going? It's been a pretty exciting, interesting match day, hasn't it?
Yeah, it's been absolutely bonkers, to be perfectly honest with you. Last couple of days where, I feel like for most people who listen to the show, unless you are maybe, a grizzled, war-battled Bundesliga veteran, weekends like this one don't really come around every so often. We don't usually see Bayern stumble at the finish line. I've been on some shows and some podcasts and speaking to people, and I have found myself describing it as historic, because it's just not something we see all that often. So it was really a fun weekend. We had a really good laugh with our subscribers in the chat on Substack. I think last I checked, we had over 410 replies or comments in there. It's just been great to kind of follow along the games this weekend with all them. So thanks to everyone who subscribes. And of course, if you have no idea what we're talking about, do have a look on Substack, download the app. And if you go to the chat function, there's these kind of threads that we can put out. And we put a matchday thread out to let subscribers chat to us during the games. And not just us, actually, a lot of subscribers have kind of chatting to each other. And I think a few of them have said they enjoy just having people to talk to because they live in, far-flung corners of the world where maybe the Bundesliga isn't on in their local pub and things like that. So, no, it's been good. It's been a really good weekend.
Yeah, it's been a really fascinating weekend, I think, from the top to the bottom of the table. And we got so much to talk about, so we should probably not dwell on all the other things that are going on this weekend and actually just jump right into it. And before we jump right into it, a little break for our advertisers.
This episode of the Gegenpressing podcast is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline.ag is your number one source for all your basketball info, stats, news, and scores. Get the latest odds and lines, including the latest player reports for this year's pro basketball playoffs. BetOnline is always your sports information headquarters this season, as we have you covered for all your sports wagering needs. Basketball, MLB, NHL hockey, right to UFC and boxing. BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to get your betting info, including live betting options and your favorite casino and card games you can play right from your home. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to get in on the action. Be sure to use our promo code BELIEVE, B-L-E-A-V, BELIEVE, to receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. That is B-L-E-A-V for 50% welcome bonus. Bet online, where the game starts.
So yeah, Stefan, the title race, you said it on the top. It feels historic. Almost nobody saw Bayern stumble. Although I have to admit, I did not feel comfortable putting them down as losing this match. I suspected that they would lose 2 points, but I did not think that they would lose all 3. Not that it mattered in the grand scheme of things, because essentially they just needed to drop points for Borussia Dortmund to go back to the top. Having said all that, we do need to start with the Rekordmeister, and I think how things went down at the Allianz Arena. We did break it down right away post-match, right, in a video that's available on the Substack, but also on YouTube, so go check that out. But Stefan, a full, 48 hours later, what's your thoughts here now that you had some time to think about what went wrong and the way this team deflated after essentially being dominant for 30 minutes? Any thoughts that you have at this stage?
Yeah, so I mean, not a lot's changed since, the full-time whistle went and we kind of jumped on YouTube to talk about it. And for anyone who didn't watch that video, I think the kind of gist of my point was that I was really struck by just how toothless Bayern were in the second half. Not just in terms of, providing a goal threat, which they didn't
Yeah.
do. I've got the stats to hand, and in the first half they created 1.23 xg, which is fine. In the second half they only created 0.43. So that kind of chance creation just went off a cliff. And it really was quite stark just how different Bayern were in the first half to second, because we were following along, we were watching the game, we are talking about it in the Substack thread, which I mentioned at the top of the show with people, and I was saying after like 20 or 30 minutes, Leipzig looked terrible. They look absolutely dreadful. They look like rabbits caught in the headlights. Couldn't string 2 or 3 passes together. And then when that Serge Gnabry goal went in, I thought, right, here we go. Bayern are going to steamroll this, and it's just going to be classic Bayern. They always rise to the occasion. This is their bread and butter. And although Leipzig did have a couple of chances just before half time, I think it's probably fair to say in that first half Bayern really dominated it. But obviously something happened in the second half. I think there's one or two things I think that were at play here. One was perhaps complacency, in the sense that the way that Bayern played and the way they created chances, they probably thought, right, that's the job done. We've got one hand on the title. We just have to see this game out. And it kind of felt like that for the first kind of 10 or 15 minutes. I actually went so far as to say, I was completely wrong, but I basically said, look, Bayern have kind of gone down a gear or two here. And then I said, but Leipzig have to kind of strike, because Bayern will step up again. It's just the way they are. They maybe have a lull, but they never managed to step out of that lull. And I do wonder if it's either complacency, a mental thing, or it's just a simple fact that they just didn't have anyone on the pitch who was capable of scoring goals. Serge Gnabry scores a great goal in the first half, but maybe I'm being harsh. It'd be interesting to hear what some Bayern fans think, but I often find with Gnabry that he's very good at these kind of one-off goals, and then he just goes quiet for 80 minutes. I don't know. Maybe it's a bit harsh to say he should be scoring more than one goal a game. That's understandable, but it feels to me like he's very kind of precise with specific moments of the game, and then he goes missing. Thomas Müller was much the same. Musiala, as we've seen since the World Cup, really hasn't really been able to kind of get going at all, really. And really, once actually Leipzig kind of took Simikan off in the right wing back role and brought in Henrichs, they really shored up that defence, and you could just feel the tide changing. And Leipzig just kind of went on and do what we expect them to do. Konrad Laimer was extremely dominant in the middle of the park, and Kunkus puts away a penalty. Szoboszlai is the same. It just felt to me like a game in which it summed up Bayern's season in a sense that they were kind of desperately looking for someone to step up and win the game for them, or to secure all 3 points for them. They were looking for Lewandowski. Maybe they're looking for Thomas Müller from a few years ago. I don't know, but they just didn't have it. And we all kind of thought or assumed that Musiala was going to become that player from the way he started the season. But it's also very harsh to kind of put that expectation on a player that young. When there are senior players like Kimmich, like Gnabry, like Müller, like Kingsley Coman, and they all just kind of shirked that responsibility. And it meant that you could kind of see the vitriol at full time, where the whole clown show came out. We had Oliver Kahn, we had Szoboszlai, Salihamidzic, we had the president, we had Kimmich, we had Müller. Everyone had to have their say as to why things weren't working. Thomas Tuchel, of course, but I don't know. It just feels to me like I said this on Twitter at full time that the club sacked Julian Nagelsmann because they had a decision to make. They either sack the head coach or they sack the team, and they took the decision to sack the coach because they can't sack the team, or they didn't want to spend the money to rebuild that team. And they're now kind of stuck looking at themselves in the mirror because they've got the squad that obviously isn't good enough, hasn't got enough match winners for one reason or another, and they're now likely going to lose the Bundesliga title because of it.
Yeah, Thomas Tuchel has averaged 1.55 points at Bayern Munich since he's taken over from Julian Nagelsmann. That's a drop, of course, from Nagelsmann's performance. And you do question that decision, though, I think, in retrospect, whether it really had A, the impact that they wanted to have, right? And B, whether it actually made sense at all. I think this is a decision that years from now the club is going to regret. I said that at the time on the podcast. I still believe this to be true. I think that there is moments when you look at the squad and you just think this team isn't being cohesively put together. The fact that their reaction, and I mean we go back to this over and over again, right? Their reaction to losing Robert Lewandowski was to sign yet another winger and Sadio Mane, who was past his prime, and this much is evident now, right? That comes down to the decision makers above Julian Nagelsmann. And I think it's very interesting how the narrative was put out there right away that like, well, we put together this team with Julian Nagelsmann. I'm sorry, but that's simply not true. Because I remember being with Bayern Munich at the training camp in the United States, and I remember talking to people in and around Nagelsmann and Nagelsmann himself, and he was insistent on him wanting another number 9, right? So this narrative that was put out after the fact is obviously there to protect certain people that have made decisions, right? And yeah, they probably said to the coach, like, look, we're not going to sign number 9. We feel the squad is good enough. And Nagelsmann had to take that because that's how it works at Bayern Munich. But you look at the way the squad is put together now and the way it's performing and the way it's just not able to reach that second gear. You just feel there is a lot of, as they say in German, Mitläufer, right? There is no real captains in this team. Joshua Kimmich, of course, would like to be one and yell at everyone who doesn't think that he isn't, but he is not necessarily someone who the team rallies around. And there's many reasons for that. Some players maybe don't take him serious. Some players probably still begrudge some of the decisions he made during the COVID pandemic, right? And maybe some think that he himself is just not leading by example, right? Because we've seen his performances. And so there is a lot of things that are going on with that. Another thing that strikes me, and I find that really interesting, is the team dropping off in performance after a certain amount of minutes, right? We've seen this, and this actually is something that I think does date back to the Nagelsmann period. Nagelsmann's team struggled to take a team apart if they didn't score the first goal in the first 15, 20 minutes. And he went so far to even admit that much in several press conferences, right? And that highlights to me two things: that A, they don't have the solution in the box. I mentioned on the show that we did the post-reaction show on the weekend that they take too many touches in the box and they're not clinical enough. But also I feel that this is a fitness issue. There is not enough players in the squad that can last the full 90 minutes and be decisive throughout the full 90 minutes. And when you look at the history of Bayern Munich and the way that the team has always been assembled, this was a team that you could not count out until the final whistle, right? What made this team so good in 2020 was that they were sharper than anyone else. They were sharper than anyone else coming out of that lockdown, right? The same can be said in 2013, where the team could never be ever counted out, right? Even, some of the shortcomings that you see now, I feel like, okay, well, where has that gone wrong and why is that happening, right? And maybe some of that is the World Cup. A large part of the players went to the World Cup. But Dortmund had a large contingent at the World Cup, right? Niklas Süle had a phenomenal game on the weekend, and he played at the World Cup. So you just kind of wonder if that really can be put forward as an excuse. So I think there seems to be a cohesiveness of structure in this team that is just lacking, and B, there seems to be certain fundamentals that have just not been addressed this year.
Yeah, I was actually just trying to pull up the our absentee page on Transfermarkt actually to have a look at which players were missing from the World Cup, just to remind myself, because but there were a handful of key players who came back injured from that World Cup, but that doesn't really excuse the core of that team, which are German and which bombed out of the World Cup as quickly as they possibly could. So
Yeah.
you're absolutely right in the sense that you can't. If Germany had reached maybe the semi-finals of the World Cup, Kimmich, Gnabry, Goretzka, etc., then you could maybe make that excuse. And if Bayern had dropped a huge amount of points and right after the World Cup, when that defense in particular was really decimated from injuries, then maybe. But I do kind of think you can draw an interesting parallel, and if you allow me to maybe slowly but surely kind of transition into Dortmund here. If you want to kind of draw a comparison between the way that Dortmund have dealt with Erling Haaland leaving the club and the way that Bayern have dealt with Robert Lewandowski leaving the club, it's completely different. And my newsletter this week is actually on the way that Dortmund's kind of patchwork of forwards this season have really kind of, through hook or by crook, have managed to really compensate for Haaland leaving. If you kind of look at the first half of the season, you had Yusuf Moukoko step in, who really out of necessity, because obviously Haller was picked up, the cancer diagnosis, and he couldn't play. Anthony Modeste was kind of parachuted into this team, which didn't really work at all. So Moukoko steps up to the plate. He does tremendously well. But you also had a kind of strong kind of supporting cast of Marco Reus, Jude Bellingham, Julian Brandt, really stepping up and saying, right, well, if our strikers are out of action and our wide forwards in Daniel Malen and Adeyemi aren't, either fit or in form, our midfielders will step up. And that's what happened in the first half. Now, don't get me wrong, Dortmund weren't great in the first half of the season. They were sixth, I think, at the end of the Hinrunde. Yep. They were, 9 points behind Bayern, I think. But if you kind of look at the way that front line really developed, arguably because most of them did have a kind of second pre-season, in the sense that, Daniel Malen obviously managed to get his sharpness and his fitness back. Adeyemi was able to finally kind of settle into the club. We saw Sebastian Haller kind of come into the team eventually as well, ahead of schedule. And perhaps just importantly, actually, Guerreiro actually managed to look like his old self again. And he, he's really been an outstanding playmaker in the second half of the season. But the point is, Dortmund are now finishing the season with this kind of this tremendous supporting class of forward players. If you look at the way they beat Augsburg at the weekend, yes, it took some time and a red card perhaps, but you had, Sebastian Haller looking at his best, Daniel Malen with a really tremendous turn of pace. I can't remember if it was for one of the goals or if it was maybe for the Adeyemi chance that he should have finished. And then Adeyemi, of course, looking extremely dangerous, not to mention the fact that Julian Brandt gets on the scoreline. And this is all, and then Marco Reus as well actually came very close when he came on. And this is all without Jude Bellingham even on the pitch. Now, you compare that performance from all those players to what happened at Bayern Munich, and you got a Bayern team who basically made no effort to really replace Lewandowski. They brought in Sadio Mane, tried to shoehorn him in, which didn't work. They then had to resort on Choupo-Moting, who did his best, but is obviously not the same quality of Lewandowski. But there was never any kind of conscious effort made to be like, right, Gnabry, you have to. I mean, I suppose Gnabry has scored a decent amount of goals, but like Leroy Sané, Coman, Gnabry, whoever else, like, we all have to score an extra 5 goals each this season because Lewandowski's not his team. I'm sure maybe Nagelsmann and Tuchel have said that on the training pitch, but it doesn't feel like these players have actually made the effort to step up. And where you have a Dortmund team that have not only players on the pitch in wide positions or in the middle of the park, or even in the case of Guerreiro, like at left back at times, stepping up and trying to be counted. You've got this Bayern team that everyone's just completely, shirking from responsibility, hiding from the limelight, determined not to kind of be the guy that everything's dependent on. So I just think those are such interesting contrasts to the way both of these teams have reacted to losing the player that scored all the goals for them. Because if you look at, everyone's talking about how much Bayern have missed Lewandowski, but you forget that Erling Haaland scored or assisted like 35% of Dortmund's league goals last season. So I just think that's an interesting contrast, and perhaps why Dortmund have looked so much better in the second half of the season and now look good to win the Bundesliga title.
Or you just look at some of the numbers, right, for Sebastian Haller. He's now scored 9 goals and 5 assists in 18 Bundesliga games, right? That's a goal every 127 minutes, because you have to remember he doesn't didn't feature for over the full 90 minutes in all of these games because he was literally recovering from cancer, which is a crazy story when you think about it, right? So he's currently on pace to score in every second game. And when you go by numbers, it's actually just above one goal a game. Again, that's insane. But you actually look at the form table in the Bundesliga, and when you take the first 16 matches where Borussia Dortmund were without Sebastian Haller, Dortmund were sixth in the standings with 28 points, 7 points behind Bayern Munich, right? Haller came back on match day 16, which is after the World Cup break. Since then, Borussia Dortmund in 18 games have won 14, drawn 3, lost just 1, scored an insane 56 goals, right? Which is the most in the Bundesliga by 15. Bayern Munich is second with 41. But also in terms of points, Borussia Dortmund in the last 18 games, so since the World Cup break, have collected 45 points, which is 10 more than RB Leipzig, who was sitting in second place, and 11 points more than Bayern Munich. And you look at that is incredible. That's incredible, and you can draw the parallel to Borussia Dortmund. They buy the player to replace Erling Haaland. They go into the new season with that player. Player gets a horrible cancer diagnosis. They have to then go and poach Anthony Modeste from Köln, right? And we can all agree that is an interesting idea, a good concept, but not the player that will, not the same caliber kind of player. Sebastian Haller goes through all of the fall and winter battling cancer, successfully recovers from the treatment and 2 operations, comes back, and this Borussia Dortmund side is completely transformed. And, that actually kind of makes you wonder what happens if Sebastian Haller does not get this diagnosis. What happens if he does stay fit throughout this entire season? It's hypotheticals, of course, but I think the title race would be over, Stefan.
Yeah, it's a fair point, actually. And it also kind of offers up some hope to Dortmund next season as well, in the hope that this isn't just a sort of flash in the pan, rich vein of form, and it might all fall apart next season because they do have the tools now to dominate. And it's not just Haller, of course. What I mean by that is it's not just his goals and assists. It's the presence that he brings to Dortmund. You can evidently see how Daniel Malin just loves to play off him. You can see how Adeyemi just loves to play off him. Same with Julian Brandt, same with Jude Bellingham. And, not to kind of put a dark twist on this, I guess, because we're trying to celebrate the fact that Dortmund's about to win a title, but say if someone like Jude Bellingham does move on this summer, there's still a huge amount of hope in that Dortmund team in the sense that, they've still got this front three who know exactly how to play off each other. They all play so well. You might have to spend some money kind of fixing up the middle of the park, but to have those 3 players and how well they play off each other is just really impressive, And I completely agree with you. It's night and day compared to Bayern. It's night and day compared to the rest of the league. And actually, if you kind of look at it across the pitch or across the league run, and we've talked about this in recent bonus show about the lack of number 9s in the Bundesliga. Sebastian Haller really stands alone in that regard, aside from maybe 1 or 2 other players like Füllkrug, or maybe if you want to consider Colomwani a number 9, which I'm not entirely sure you would, but maybe you would for argument's sake. He really does stand alone in that regard, and he has allowed this Dortmund team to kind of click into gear, which is really impressive because you kind of look back to how Dortmund played with Erling Haaland in the team last season, and yeah, he scored the goals, and yeah, he got the headlines. And we said this at the time, look, Dortmund are winning games, kinda, and Erling Haaland scoring goals for fun. But Dortmund last season were a very direct team that punted the ball right past their midfield, right past their wingers, and they were constantly trying to catch teams on the back foot and allow Haaland to kind of run in and score goals. And that was fine and it was fun for a while, but you could see the limitations in that because it meant that if Haaland was either injured or if a team sat deep, no one else in the team was really willing to kind of take any responsibility or simply didn't have to take any responsibility. That's been completely inverted this season. And you can see the way that, and this is a really good example of, what Terzic has done right, You can see that he's somehow managed to get through to guys like Julian Brandt, Adeyemi, Daniel Malin, all of them really. Guerrero, Guerrero and Brandt in particular actually are two players who've really frustrated Dortmund fans for a number of seasons now. They've had good seasons, they've had bad seasons. Both of them have really come into a fantastic run of form. And I think that's a testament to Terzic, to the fact that he's clearly sat down with his team and said, you all have to take responsibility here. You all have to step up. It's not a case of Haller scoring the goals. It's not a case of, Adeyemi scoring the goals. Everyone has to kind of take control here. And that's what this team have done. That's what they did against Augsburg. And not only is it really encouraging for the sense that they're about to win a title, but it's also hugely encouraging for them going forward in the sense that, they're no longer a team defined by one or two star players who will inevitably move on. They're now a fully fledged, functioning team, possibly capable of even more than just challenging Dortmund for Bayern for the odd title.
Yeah, it's really interesting too. There was a report by Konstantin Eckner for ESPN. We had Eckner on at the show before, right? And he's kind of written an article on what Dortmund have changed during the World Cup break, and it's interesting too because we've been asked whether we need to give Terzic more credit here, and I think that's true. We do, but I think it's also really interesting that he has essentially responded to some of the shortcomings that we've addressed in the first half of the season, right? In that he has now a different role as a head coach, and it sounds like he's almost more of a manager now in the traditional English sense, right? Where he just basically works on the tactics. He does one-on-one conversations with the players, but the actual coaching is happening with other members of the staff, right? And I actually think that this is really quite fascinating, right? That Terzic, because like one of our accusations was that, well, he's a bit of a cheerleader, right? He's a super fan turned head coach, which is fine because like he's also obviously has very good tactical ideas, but it seemed like there were some fundamentals missing in terms of training. And in Dortmund's, we have to applaud Dortmund and the decision makers at Dortmund to see this and address it and still preserve the working relationship, right? So I think that is really something that changed as well. And I think that is actually also kind of key, right? If you want to have success as a club. One thing that has frustrated me for years about Borussia Dortmund was their lack of ability to change. The fact that they were always going to be on the same course. We're going to steer this course. We're going to be always Borussia Dortmund. We're going to wait for Bayern Munich to be weak, which in fairness, they did. But, when you look at the after World Cup Bundesliga table, then it becomes quite clear that they were actually excellent, right? They have made up for their poor start. So I think that's all really interesting. I think that there is things that have happened within Borussia Dortmund that have addressed shortcomings in the right way. And yes, maybe without a World Cup break, that doesn't happen. But the World Cup break is a reality that every single Bundesliga club faces, right? Bayern Munich too, we're going into the World Cup break with known problems, right? It wasn't like they were running away with the Bundesliga table at that point. There was other teams challenging them. And they did have that spell for 4 games where they didn't win a single game, right? So they had shortcomings themselves. And it's really interesting how the two different teams took that extensive break. One of them addressed the issues correctly and had the fortune that their star striker came back, right? But and the other team essentially said, well, we're leading the table, we're fine. And then just to completely blow it up in the international break in March, right? And literally breaking up. They pressed the red button on this, didn't they? And it's kind of like that Oppenheimer movie where they worried and that the world could blow up when they pressed the red button. Well, for Bayern, unfortunately, blew up. But yeah, here we are. I think Stefan, it is super exciting, and obviously the title race is going to dominate it for us for the rest of the week in terms of what we're writing and in terms of what we're going to report on. But we also have to. I want to kind of slowly transition this to the other things that are happening in the Bundesliga because there's a lot of things going on. We should probably move to the to the relegation battle, unless there's something else that you want to add to Bayern and Dortmund.
No, I think we're good. We're going to spend a lot of time talking about both clubs, I think, in the coming weeks. So
Yeah.
and the relegation race is just as fascinating. So I think we definitely should dive straight into it.
We should, because like both you and I before the show sort of the juggling, the mathematically juggling of different results and the way it could turn out. And imagine what's that gif with the guy and the calculation from I think it's from Hangover, right?
Oh, yeah.
The poker game. So that was us trying to figure out who's going to go down, who's going to stay up. I get this asked all the time, like, who do you think is going to go down? I'm like, Stefan, I have no idea. Right? What do I know? I can just tell you that based on the results that we had this weekend, Stuttgart looked like the great winner to me, and boy, did they have a fantastic performance with that 4-1 win over Mainz that catapults them out of the relegation zone entirely. Right. The other takeaway I had, Dortmund's win over Augsburg kind of puts them into dangerous waters in the final match day. Schalke's point, okay, I think that's going to hurt them, but at the same time, that's still a point that could be very valuable. We now know Hertha are gone. Schalke, I think we predicted this from happening, that it would happen, so that there's no huge surprise here. But Stefan, Augsburg are sort of in it, but they have a dead rubber match against Gladbach, right? So I think we essentially, it comes down to Stuttgart, Bochum, or Schalke, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I watched the Schalke game, and I was chatting to someone on Twitter about this, because I was just basically saying, I was tweeting it with such exuberance and delight when Schalke scored that, someone was responded saying, when they went down a few years ago, I didn't feel too bad because, the club was mismanaged. They looked like a financial kind of mess. They looked like a sleeping giant. They just kind of stumbled and fell. He's like, I didn't have much sympathy for them, but now I can't help but get behind this team. And I completely agree with them. Been watching Schalke for the last 5 or 6 weeks now, almost, religiously. And this weekend's game against Frankfurt was just another example that just kind of, you can't help but endear yourself to this team. They score, Terodde scores a great goal in the first minute of the game, like 55 seconds, in his final home game as a Schalke player, which is just, really quite touching, actually. Now, Frankfurt did manage to pull himself back into this game. I feel quite bad for Schalke in the sense that, Schwolo in goals, he's replacing the injured Farman, and I don't know if you saw Kamada's goal, but it was a shot from outside the box. It just went right through the goalkeeper's hands. Complete clanger from a goalkeeper who, admittedly has some history with this. Tuta then scores in the second half, and you kind of think, well, that's it, Frankfurt managed to pull it around. They've got to go on and win this game, and Schalke are really in trouble. But then Poulter scores in the 85th minute, and a tremendous goal. And I don't know, there's just this never say die attitude from Schalke, especially under Rice took over the club. I think we talked about this a few weeks ago in terms of, I don't have the stats to hand because I haven't updated them, but I remember maybe 1 week ago or 2 weeks ago, I kind of checked what the Bundesliga table would look like since Thomas Rice came into the team. And, Schalke would be sitting 10th or 11th, So they have really put on a strong showing. Actually, in the last 10 match days, they'd be 12th in the league tables. There you go. The last 5 match days, would be 9th. So they are crawling. They're grasping and crawling at everything they can get. And they go into that final match day against an RB Leipzig team who've got nothing to play for.
Yeah.
I'm not entirely sure what they can hope for. And I think they basically need Stuttgart and Bochum to lose, because their goal difference is such that even if they get up into 34 points, I think they're still behind Augsburg on goal difference. They basically need Bochum and Stuttgart to lose, which isn't beyond the realms of possibility, because Bochum have played a very difficult Leverkusen
or
team.
Draw would do you too, yeah.
Yeah, so there's still plenty to play for, and I'm not a Schalke fan. I've never been a Schalke fan, but I can't help but root for this team. I don't know. I mean, it'd be interesting if people let us know in the comments what they think. But I've just found myself really rooting for this team right now.
Yeah, so here's my worries. Stuttgart, when it comes to Schalke, Stuttgart are playing a dead rubber against Hoffenheim, right? Hoffenheim on the beach. The upside is Schalke playing Leipzig on the beach, drinking their Red Bull. Although that's not 100% true because they have a German Cup final to play, right? But so, okay, that actually makes it even worse for Bochum because Schalke are playing a Leipzig side that doesn't want to that's essentially going to experiment, right? Because they have to replace Guardiola in defense. And then they're probably going to rotate a few players to make sure that the week after they're match fit for a really big game in Berlin against Frankfurt. So Stuttgart, they play pretty much a dead rubber. Schalke, big opportunity to get maybe 3 points against Leipzig. So it really then comes down to me what's going to happen in that Bochum game. And this is where it's juicy because Bochum are playing a Leverkusen side who need a win to guarantee that they finish 6th, which could, depending on how the German Cup final ends, be either a Europa League spot or Conference League spot, right? They're obviously hoping it's a Europa League spot, right? But what I'm saying is Leverkusen will have to win their match. And I think in terms of quality, they're probably going to beat Bochum. So I think that makes it, I kind of feel it makes it between those three sides. Yes, Augsburg, if certain things go a certain way, they could still end up in the relegation playoff spot, right? If they lose to Gladbach, a Gladbach side that did steal 2 points from Leverkusen on the weekend, coming back from a 2-0 deficit. There was some life in that team yet, right? So curious to see how that's going to end. I think Gladbach too, they're saying goodbye to a bunch of players in their final home match. So they maybe want to win that game, right? But I just feel that I think it's going to be between Bochum and Schalke is sort of my feeling here on who's going to go down directly and who's maybe in a playoff relegation spot.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I guess if you're Schalke, you'll probably take you'll take that playoff spot right now, wouldn't you? Because
against HSV.
Well, having working with a lot of people in Hamburg, I know fine well just how useless Hamburg have been recently. And yeah, as I said, Schalke have basically been one of the top 10 teams in the Bundesliga over the last 2 or 3 months. So on current form, you would think that they would fancy themselves against just about any team in this Zweite Bundesliga. Maybe Stuttgart and Bochum would too. And this is the really interesting aspect to why the relegation race has been so good. If you kind of look at the form table, these teams at the bottom of the table have actually been picking up a lot of points recently,
Yeah.
Like the likes of Schalke, Bochum, Stuttgart, over the course of the last 10 games are 10th, 11th and 12th in the form table. Gladbach have picked up fewer points, Mainz, Frankfurt, Augsburg, Bremen, of course Hertha are still bottom, but it's, what's kind of made this kind of relegation race so interesting is that these bottom 2 or 3 sides, specifically Stuttgart, Bochum and Schalke, have all been basically, they're not winning every week, but they're picking up points every week.
Yeah.
But because the 3 of them continue to pick up points together, they can't pull away from each other. And that's why they're in this situation where, it's going to come down to the last match days. So it's going to be fantastic. I can't wait for it. There'll be tears depending on who goes down, I suppose. But yeah, I think any of those 3 teams would obviously take 16th over 17th, goes without saying. But I think they'd all kind of quietly think they could fancy themselves in that playoff spot as well. So I guess we'll see what happens.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, sooner or later, Hamburg are gonna go up, right?
But are they though? Are they?
I don't know if I want to play that Russian roulette though. I've been in the relegation playoffs with my team, and it's not fun. I don't want to take that chance, but someone will have to. I think maybe if you finish 16th, we kind of hope that Heidenheim still slip into that third spot somehow, right? The second division. You look at the final match day there. Let me just pull that up, because like the final match day in the second division is actually quite interesting as well. And Hamburg and Heidenheim are just 1 point apart, if I'm correct. So, and I think they both have very easy to win games. I looked at this morning. It was Heidenheim, I think, were playing. I know Hamburg is playing Sandhausen away. So, yeah, it's I don't know. I just don't know if I want to do that. Here, there it is, the match day. Let me just get that up. I'm doing this live as we speak. Here it is. So Hamburg is in Sandhausen, who are already relegated to the third division. And then Heidenheim have Jan Regensburg away, who are technically pretty much relegated already too. Probably on goal differential. So, yeah, it does look like it's going to be HSV on that third spot. Yeah, I don't know. Either way, Stefan, I think we're obviously going to cover the relegation playoff matches, right? So don't worry, we're gonna stay tuned. I'm probably going to be at both of them, depending on geography, especially if it's in Hamburg, because I'm actually in the office in Hamburg that week, so I will get to see it live this year. The tears and the drama and everything that involves a relegation playoff, a match. But I think it's totally gonna come down to the wire for the next 2 weeks.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, we're just gonna have to wait and see what happens. It's on a a knife's edge, if you will. But I mean, I think I was going to give some predictions. I think we'll save those for the preview show and maybe just wrap up. But it's great. I'm glad it's. I mean, as people have suggested, I think it was maybe Christian Nayari on Twitter was saying it's the best Bundesliga season in total we've had in years, and I couldn't agree more. From top to bottom, it's just been great drama, and it'll be a shame to see it end. But at the same time, I am bloody exhausted. That's the downside to being amazing. I'm exhausted from it.
Okay, so here's maybe my final point, and this might totally blow up in my face, but I think this will be the norm. I think that the years of Bayern Munich or any Bundesliga team dominating the way we've seen it in the last 10 years have come to an end. Even if Bayern somehow win the title, this is the lowest point total a champion has had since Louis van Gaal's Bayern Munich side won it in 2011, right? 2010. So 13 years ago. But this used to be the norm. Bundesliga titles were not decided with 80 points plus until that dominant period with Bayern Munich, where they were twice won the treble, right? I think that was a phase where they really benefited from a golden generation of players, where they had certain players fall into their laps, right? Which, foreign observers often said they destroyed the league. I think it was just a very strong, dominant run. And we've seen this happening in other leagues. The Juventus and Serie A comes to mind, right? So I think we're kind of regressing back to the norm, to what the Bundesliga used to be. I think Bayern are probably still going to win the majority of titles, but we're not going to have the 80-plus title winners anymore. You see it with throughout the board, like goal scoring in terms of Serge Gnabry, for example, could still win the Torjägerkanone, right? With 16, 17 goals. That used to be kind of the norm in the 90s and early 2000s. And I think we're kind of regressing back to that. I think there's an end of a golden era, which doesn't, for Bayern, still means lots of titles. So I wouldn't worry too much about it if I was a Bayern fan. But I think we might have this every year now again, which of course we would appreciate, because, it makes it trickier to cover the league, but more fun. So, this is maybe my final take for this show, Stefan, that this might be the new normal.
And long may it continue.
Long may it continue. Absolutely. All right, guys, that's it. Match day 33 recap. We have one more week plus relegation playoffs and the German Cup. This is going to go down to the wire. It's going to be fascinating, exciting. We're going nowhere. We're going to keep you covered throughout check out the Substack Matchday threads. They're a ton of fun. You can get involved if you're anywhere in the world and you just want to have a great Bundesliga community you get engaged with. Check it out. It is a ton of fun. We had over 400 messages in the thread this match day, and I think it's still going. So yeah, it's a ton of fun. As always, this show is brought to you by BetOnline. Can't forget the sponsors. And Stefan will be back later this week with our usual set of shows. Until next time, auf Wiedersehen.
Thank you for listening to Believe. You can show support to your host by subscribing to the show and giving us a 5-star rating on your preferred platform. Check us out at Believe.com and search for BLEAV on YouTube.